He was 42 years old, sitting in a tiny apartment, surrounded by bills he couldn't pay and dreams he no longer believed in. He had read the books. He had attended the seminars. He had written down his goals every single morning for 3 years. And nothing had changed. Not a single thing. The bank account was the same. The relationships were the same. The fear was the same. Worse, actually. Because now it was mixed with something heavier. The quiet, crushing weight of self-doubt. And then one evening, almost by accident, he stumbled across a recording of Bob Proctor speaking in a small conference room to a group of about 30 people. There was nothing theatrical about it. No lights, no music, just a man standing at the front of a room, speaking with the kind of quiet certainty that made you lean forward in your chair. Bob said something that night that stopped the man cold. He said, "The problem is not your circumstances. The problem is not your boss, your economy, or your past. The problem is a law, a mental law that you are operating under without even knowing it exists. And until you understand that law, everything you try will feel like pushing a boulder uphill. But once you understand it, once you truly understand it, the boulder disappears." The man rewound the recording and listened again and again. And in that moment, something shifted, not outside of him, but inside of him. The law Bob was describing wasn't new. It had been working in his life every single day. The tragedy was that he had been using it against himself. What is this mental law, and how can understanding it transform the trajectory of your entire life? That is what we are going to explore today, in the words, the wisdom, and the undeniable truth of Bob Proctor. He was 42 years old, sitting in a tiny apartment, surrounded by bills he couldn't pay and dreams he no longer believed in. He had read the books. He had attended the seminars. He had written down his goals every single morning for 3 years. And nothing had changed. Not a single thing. The bank account was the same. The relationships were the same. The fear was the same. Worse, actually, because now it was mixed with something heavier. The quiet, crushing weight of self-doubt. And then one evening, almost by accident, he stumbled across a recording of Bob Proctor speaking in a small conference room to a group of about 30 people. There was nothing theatrical about it. No lights, no music, just a man standing at the front of a room, speaking with the kind of quiet certainty that made you lean forward in your chair. Bob said something that night that stopped the man cold. He said, "The problem is not your circumstances. The problem is not your boss, your economy, or your past. The problem is a law, a mental law that you are operating under without even knowing it exists. And until you understand that law, everything you try will feel like pushing a boulder uphill. But once you understand it, once you truly understand it, the boulder disappears." The man rewound the recording and listened again and again. And in that moment, something shifted, not outside of him, but inside of him. The law Bob was describing wasn't new. It had been working in his life every single day. The tragedy was that he had been using it against himself. What is this mental law, and how can understanding it transform the trajectory of your entire life? That is what we are going to explore today, in the words, the wisdom, and the undeniable truth of Bob Proctor. Bob Proctor opened nearly every seminar he ever taught with the same arresting statement. You are living in a prison, and the walls of that prison are invisible. He wasn't speaking metaphorically to provoke emotion. He was stating what he considered to be a precise psychological and spiritual fact about the human condition. The law he referred to as the law of attraction, but Bob was careful to explain it in a way that went far deeper than the popular culture version most people have encountered. It is not about vision boards. It is not about thinking happy thoughts. It is about understanding the vibrational nature of consciousness itself. Everything in the universe, Bob taught, is energy in motion. Your thoughts are energy. Your feelings are energy. The chair you sit in, the car you drive, the money in your account, all of it is energy vibrating at different frequencies. And like energies attract like energies. This is not a metaphor, it is PC. The problem, Bob explained, is that most people's dominant thoughts and feelings are not the ones they choose consciously. They are the ones installed in them during childhood by parents, teachers, culture, religion, and media, long before they had the critical faculty to evaluate them. Bob called this installed programming the paradigm. The paradigm is a multitude of habits fixed in the subconscious mind, and it is the paradigm, not your willpower, not your desire, not your intelligence, that controls your behavior and therefore your results. You can want change with everything you have. You can set goals, make plans, take action. But if the paradigm does not align with what you are reaching for, the subconscious will systematically undermine every effort. This is not weakness. This is law. Bob used the analogy of a thermostat. If the thermostat in a room is set to 68 degrees and you open a window to let in cold air, the furnace automatically activates to bring the temperature back to 68. Your subconscious operates the same way. It always seeks to maintain its current setting. The extraordinary implication of this is that failure is not a character flaw. Repeated financial struggle is not a sign of laziness. Chronic relationship dysfunction is not bad luck. These are all predictable outputs of a paradigm that has not yet been changed. Bob was fond of quoting Dr. Thurman Fleet, who said, "The thinking mind is the master. The feeling mind is the servant, but the servant has become the master." Our emotional conditioning runs the show until we learn to intervene consciously. Understanding this law is the beginning of real freedom, because once you know that your results are not determined by fate, but by a programmable mental pattern, you also know that the pattern can be changed, and that changes everything. Bob Proctor dedicated the majority of his teaching life to one concept above all others: the paradigm. He described it as the greatest obstacle standing between any person and the life they truly desire. Not circumstances, not timing, not resources. The paradigm. A paradigm, as Bob explained it, is a collection of ideas, beliefs, and habitual behaviors that have been fixed in the subconscious mind over time. It is the lens through which you see the world, the filter that decides what you notice and what you ignore, and the governor that determines how much success you will allow yourself to experience. Most people, Bob observed, live the same year 50 times and call it a life. They repeat the same financial patterns, the same relationship dynamics, the same emotional responses to stress, not because they want to, but because their paradigm keeps pulling them back to familiar territory. The paradigm is not housed in the conscious mind. This is why affirmations alone often fail. You can say positive statements all day long, but if the subconscious is broadcasting a contradictory frequency 24 hours a day at a much greater amplitude, the positive statement is like a whisper in a hurricane. Bob taught that paradigms are primarily formed in early childhood, between the ages of 2 and 7, when the brain is operating predominantly in a theta wave state, essentially a hypnotic state. During this period, information is absorbed directly into the subconscious without conscious filtering or evaluation. This means that beliefs you hold today about money, worthiness, love, and possibility were largely installed before you were old enough to ride a bicycle. You did not choose them. You absorbed them from the environment you were born into, and unless you consciously intervene, you will live by them for the rest of your life. The good news. Bob could barely contain his enthusiasm when he delivered this part, is that paradigms can be changed, not by force of will alone, but by the deliberate and persistent use of specific mental techniques that speak directly to the subconscious mind in its own language. Bob studied how paradigms are formed the same way they were originally created, through repetition, emotion, and immersion. Just as a child absorbs programming through constant exposure and emotional intensity, the adult can deliberately install a new paradigm through the same mechanisms if they understand how. He often pointed to people who had experienced sudden, dramatic life transformations, a health crisis, a spiritual awakening, a profound loss, and explained that these events can crack the paradigm open because they are emotionally intense and unavoidable. But you do not have to wait for a crisis to change. You can choose to change your paradigm intentionally, methodically, and beginning today. Bob's entire body of work was a manual for doing exactly that. The question is not whether it's possible. The question is whether you are willing to do the work consistently enough for the new programming to take hold. One of the most powerful diagrams Bob Proctor ever drew on a whiteboard was a simple stick figure divided in two. The top labeled conscious mind and the bottom labeled subconscious mind. He would hold up a marker, point to that drawing, and say, "Until you understand what's happening here, nothing else matters." The conscious mind, Bob explained, is the part of you that can think, reason, accept, or reject ideas. It is your rational faculty, the seat of your willpower and intellectual analysis. It is where goals are born and decisions are made, and it is vastly less powerful than the mind beneath it. The subconscious mind does not reason. It does not evaluate, judge, or question. It simply accepts what is given to it through repetition and emotion, and then works tirelessly, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to reproduce those conditions in your physical reality. It is the most obedient servant in existence. The problem is that most people have given it terrible instructions. Bob frequently quoted Dr. Joseph Murphy's insight that the subconscious mind is like fertile soil. It will grow corn or nightshade with equal indifference. Plant fear and it will produce fearful experiences. Plant abundance and it will produce abundant results. It has no preference. It only executes the war that most people experience in their daily lives. Wanting one thing but consistently getting another is the war between the conscious desire and the subconscious program. And the subconscious almost always wins. Not because it is more powerful in principle, but because it operates continuously while the conscious mind is only active in focused moments. Bob pointed out that roughly 96% of our daily behavior is driven by subconscious programming. What you eat, how you respond to stress, how much money you allow yourself to make, how you behave in romantic relationships, all of it is largely running on autopilot from a program written years or decades ago. This is why Bob insisted that self-discipline alone is an inadequate strategy for lasting change. Self-discipline is a function of the conscious mind. It is exhausting, it requires constant vigilance, and it cannot override a deeply embedded subconscious program for long. True transformation requires changing the program itself. To change the subconscious program, you must speak to it in its language, imagery, emotion, and repetition. When you visualize with feeling, when you repeat new ideas to yourself with genuine emotion until they become as natural as breathing, you are rewriting the code. You are updating the operating system. Bob would often ask audiences, how many of you have ever tried something, failed at it, tried again, and failed again, and concluded that you just aren't capable? Nearly every hand would go up. That wasn't a capability problem, he would say. That was a paradigm problem. Change the paradigm and the capability reveals itself. The relationship between the conscious and subconscious mind is not adversarial by nature. When they are aligned, when what you consciously desire matches what the subconscious is programmed to produce, life flows with a kind of grace and ease that most people have never experienced, but that Bob insisted is every human being's birthright. Bob Proctor loved science, not the kind that required a laboratory, but the kind that could be observed in everyday human experience. And one of his most foundational scientific claims was this: everything in the universe is in a constant state of vibration, and you, your thoughts, your feelings, your body are no exception. He would often quote Albert Einstein's famous statement that everything is energy, and then take it a step further. If everything is energy, Bob would ask, then what determines what kind of energy you attract into your life? The answer is your vibration. And your vibration is determined by how you feel. Feelings, in Bob's teaching, are not just emotional responses to circumstances. They are the transmission frequency of your consciousness. When you feel fear, lack, and anxiety, you are broadcasting on a frequency that will attract more experiences of fear, lack, and anxiety. When you feel gratitude, abundance, and possibility, you broadcast the frequency that draws those experiences toward you. This is where many people misunderstand the law. They attempt to feel abundant while looking at an empty bank account and experience it as an exercise in denial or delusion. But Bob was clear. The feeling is not a lie. It is a signal. You are not pretending the bank account is full. You are choosing the frequency of the person who has already decided that abundance is their destiny. Bob taught that emotions are the language of the subconscious mind. You cannot install a new paradigm through logic alone. You must feel the new belief. You must experience the emotion of the desired state as though it already exists. This is not acting. This is creation. He frequently pointed to the science of quantum physics, specifically the observer effect, which suggests that the act of observation influences the behavior of particles at the subatomic level. For Bob, this was confirmation of what mystics and philosophers had always known. Consciousness participates in the creation of reality, your dominant emotional state, not your occasional good mood, but your habitual emotional frequency is your point of magnetic attraction. This is why two people can live in identical circumstances and experience entirely different realities. One is broadcasting from fear and the other from faith, and they're literally living in different worlds. Bob advised against obsessively monitoring current conditions as a measure of progress. You cannot see the frequency on a radio dial, he would say, but you know it's there because of what comes through the speaker. In the same way, your inner vibration is real and active long before any evidence of it appears in the physical world. The practice Bob recommended was simple, though not easy. Deliberately choose, every single day, to hold feelings of gratitude, love, joy, and confident expectation. Not because of what is happening around you, but because of what you are calling toward you. This is not naive optimism. This is precision engineering of your life. When you understand that your feeling is your frequency, and your frequency is your point of attraction, every moment becomes a creative choice. You are always broadcasting. The only question is whether you are broadcasting by default or by design. Bob Proctor was one of the most articulate teachers on the subject of goal setting who ever lived, but his approach was radically different from what most productivity gurus teach. He was not interested in SMART goals, quarterly reviews, or milestone charts. He was interested in something far more elemental: the image you hold in your mind. He taught that a goal is not a plan. A goal is a decision. It is a clear, vivid, emotionally charged mental image of a reality you intend to bring into existence. And the power of that goal lies entirely in the intensity and consistency with which you hold that image in your conscious mind and plant it into your subconscious. Bob often quoted Andrew Carnegie, who said that whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. He was careful to stress the word believe, not just conceive. You can imagine $1 million and immediately follow that thought with "but." That's not realistic for someone like me. That secondary thought is the one the subconscious receives most clearly. Bob's instruction was to choose a goal that genuinely excites you, not a goal you think is achievable, but a goal that fills you with a sense of aliveness. He called these C-type goals. Goals so big that your current self has no idea how to achieve them. He said the how is not your job. Your job is the what and the why. When you hold an image in your mind with consistency and emotion, Bob taught, it begins to act upon the subconscious like a command. The subconscious then begins to restructure your thoughts, your perceptions, and your behavior in ways that move you toward the image, often through paths you could not have predicted or planned. He called this process living from the end. You do not think about your goal as something in the future. You think from the goal as if you have already arrived. This subtle but profound shift, intense, changes the emotional signal you send to the subconscious, and therefore changes the frequency you broadcast to the universe. One of the most important things Bob stressed was the danger of how thinking too early. Most people kill their goals in the cradle by immediately asking, "But how would I do that?" The how is a trap for the conscious mind. It leads you back to your current paradigm, which by definition can only show you paths that are already familiar. Bob taught that the how unfolds from the decision. First you decide, then you act on every intuition, impulse, and opportunity that presents itself in alignment with that decision. You do not wait for a map. You move, and the map reveals itself step by step as you walk forward in faith. He was emphatic about the power of writing the goal down, not just thinking it, but writing it in the present tense, as if it already exists. I am so happy and grateful now that This phrasing, he explained, bypasses the conscious mind's resistance and speaks directly to the goal-producing mechanism of the subconscious. A goal properly set, Bob would say, is already halfway achieved, because the moment you make a true decision, not a wish, not a preference, but a committed decision, you shift your vibration, and that shift begins to rearrange the universe around you. Bob Proctor was not a theorist. He was a practitioner, and while he could speak for hours on the principles underlying paradigm change, what he cared about most was the practical application. What do you actually do to change the programming that has been run in your life without your conscious permission? The first and most foundational method Bob taught was repetition. The paradigm was installed through repetition, through the same ideas being reinforced again and again during childhood. It can only be replaced through repetition as well. This is why Bob read his goals aloud every single day, multiple times a day, for decades. But repetition alone is not enough, Bob insisted. The second essential ingredient is emotion. When you repeat a new idea with genuine emotional intensity, when you actually feel the truth of it, as you stated, you are sending that idea deep into the subconscious in a way that dry repetition cannot achieve. The third method is visualization. Bob practiced what he called mental movies, sitting quietly each day and running vivid, detailed mental films of his desired life as if it were already real. He would see himself in the scenes. He would feel the emotions. He would engage all of his senses. And he did this with the same discipline he would bring to any other professional practice. Bob also taught the power of surrounding yourself with people who are already operating at the paradigm level you wish to reach. He called this the proximity principle. If you spend the majority of your time around people who are limited by small thinking, your paradigm will remain stubbornly anchored in that smallness. But spend time, even virtual time, through books, audio, and video, with those who have transcended those limits, and your paradigm begins to expand. One of his most powerful and often underestimated tools was gratitude. Bob taught that gratitude is not just a pleasant emotion. It is a high-frequency vibration that opens the subconscious to receive new programming. When you are in a genuine state of gratitude, you are not in fear. And when you are not in fear, the door to the subconscious swings open. He was also a strong proponent of investing in your own education, and not just formal education, but the daily, lifelong reading of books that expand your understanding of the mind, the universe, and human potential. Bob read for an hour every single morning for his entire adult life. He considered this non-negotiable. Acting as if is another technique Bob described with great care. This doesn't mean lying to yourself. It means choosing your behavior in alignment with your desired paradigm before the evidence arrives. You speak, move, invest, and decide like the person you intend to become, because that behavior reinforces the new neural and spiritual patterning you are installing. Bob was honest about the challenge. Paradigm change is uncomfortable. Your nervous system will resist it. You will feel like you are pretending. Old doubts will surface loudly. We call this the terror barrier. The moment when most people turn back. Those who push through it are the ones who change their lives. The secret, Bob said, is to love the discomfort, to understand that every moment of fear in the face of a new paradigm is a signal that you are on the right track. The terror barrier is not a stop sign. It is a doorway, and on the other side of it is the life you have always known was possible. Bob Proctor's ultimate vision was not one of personal enrichment. It was one of collective awakening. He believed, with the full force of everything he had studied and lived, that every single human being on this planet carries within them the seed of an extraordinary life. The tragedy, he said, is how few people ever water that seed. Living by design, as opposed to living by default, is the practical expression of everything Bob taught. It means taking authorship of your life, choosing your thoughts, your images, your feelings, and your actions with intention, rather than allowing them to be dictated by habit, history, and circumstance. Bob often quoted the poet Ella Wheeler Wilcox. One ship drives east, and another drives west, with the selfsame winds that blow. It is the set of the sails, and not the gales, which decides the way to go. The conditions of your life are the wind Your paradigm is the sail. And you can change the set of your sail at any time. Financial abundance was a subject Bob returned to often. Not because money is the highest aspiration, but because it is the area where most people's limiting programming is most visible and most painful. He taught that money is simply an idea, a concentrated symbol of value exchanged, and that your relationship with money is entirely a product of your paradigm. Bob rejected the idea that wanting more was somehow spiritually impure. He argued the opposite. That desire is the creative impulse of the universe expressing itself through you. When you suppress your desire for a bigger life, you suppress the divine creative energy that is the most natural thing about being human. He taught that service and abundance are not opposites. They are partners. The more value you provide to others, the more abundance naturally flows back to you. This is the law of giving and receiving, and it is not a moral prescription, but a description of how the universe actually operates. Bob spoke often of the importance of making a decision and then refusing to retreat from it. He would say, "The moment you make a real decision, the universe reorganizes itself in your favor." This is not mystical language. It is a description of what happens when your internal frequency aligns completely with a specific outcome. One of Bob's most personal and moving teachings was about legacy. He would say that the greatest gift you can give to the people you love is not money, not security, but the example of a life fully lived, a life in which you refused to settle, refused to believe the limitations the world tried to impose on you, and dared to become everything you were created to be. He returned, always, to the fundamental truth. You are a spiritual being living a physical experience, possessing a mind of infinite creative power. You are not the product of your past. You are not the sum of your circumstances. You are not your paradigm. You are the thinker who can change the paradigm. And that makes you free. The mental law that controls your destiny is always operating. Right now, in this moment, it is shaping your tomorrow. The only question that remains, the only question that has ever mattered, is this: will you use it by accident or by design? Bob Proctor once said, "You don't decide what your purpose is in life, you discover it." And what he discovered, through decades of study, teaching, and relentless personal growth, was a purpose as clear and as simple as the law he spent his life explaining, to help people understand that they are not victims of circumstance, but architects of their destiny. Every word he spoke, every seminar he taught, every book he wrote was an act of radical generosity toward the human potential he saw so clearly in everyone he met, even when they could not see it in themselves. He gave us not just ideas to think about, but a law to live by. What you have received today is not information. Information alone does not change lives. What you have received is an invitation to examine the paradigm you have been living under, to ask the honest question of whether it is truly yours, or whether it was given to you before you were old enough to choose, and to make a decision, perhaps for the very first time, to begin building the mental architecture of the life you actually want. The law is exact. The law is impartial. The law will work for you the moment you choose to work with it. If this video has stirred something in you, a recognition, a possibility, a quiet certainty that you are capable of more than your current life, reflects then. Honor that feeling. Write it down. Say it out loud. Take one small action today that the old paradigm would never have allowed, because that is how it begins. Not with a dramatic, overnight transformation, but with